Imagine being the only human in a galaxy where your species is considered nothing more than primitive savages. You're captured, imprisoned, and brought before the most powerful alien ruler in known space. She sits on a throne made from the bones of conquered worlds, her 6 eyes burning with ancient hatred for anything that breathes oxygen like you do. But then she asks you something that freezes your blood. Tell me about my daughter. You've never met her daughter. You don't even know she has one. But somehow in that moment, you realize that your answer won't just determine whether you live or die. It will reshape the entire balance of power in the universe. What could a lowly human possibly say that would shock the queen of the Zephyrian Empire, ruler of 1,000 star systems, conqueror of countless civilizations? The answer lies in the most human trait of all, the ability to see what others cannot, to understand what others refuse to acknowledge, and to speak truths that even the most powerful beings in the galaxy fear to face. This is the story of how one human's words brought the mightiest empire in the cosmos to its knees, not through weapons or technology, but through something far more dangerous, the truth about what it means to be alive, to love, and to choose your own destiny. Welcome to a tale where humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, our weapons, or our numbers, but our ability to understand the heart of any being, no matter how alien, no matter how powerful, no matter how lost they might be. Marcus Chun had always been good at reading people. It was what made him an excellent xenobiologist and an even better negotiator. But nothing in his 28 years of life had prepared him for reading the emotions of a 7-foot-tall insectoid alien whose mandibles could snap his spine in half. The transport ship lurched violently as it dropped out of hyperspace, throwing Marcus against the energy barriers of his containment cell. Through the transparent aluminum walls, he watched the Zephyrian soldiers move with mechanical precision, their chitinous armor gleaming under the ship's harsh lighting. Each soldier stood nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws and compound eyes that missed nothing. Marcus had been captured 3 days ago during what was supposed to be a routine scientific expedition to the Outer Rim territories. His team had been studying the migration patterns of spaceborne organisms when Zephyrian raiders ambushed their research vessel. The other 7 members of his crew were dead within minutes. Marcus only survived because the raiders' leader had received specific orders: capture any humans alive for questioning. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. They were babies in a galaxy filled with civilizations that had been exploring the stars for millennia. The Galactic Consortium barely tolerated Earth's membership, viewing humans as an amusing curiosity at best and a potential threat at worst. Most alien species saw humans as violent primitives who had somehow stumbled into space technology they didn't deserve. But the Zephyrian Empire was different. They didn't just dismiss humanity, they actively hunted them. Any human found in Zephyrian space was to be captured or killed on sight. No explanation was ever given. No warnings were issued. The Empire's hatred for humanity seemed to spring from some deep, inexplicable source that no human had ever understood. Until now, perhaps. The transport ship shuddered as massive docking clamps secured it to something much larger. Marcus pressed his face to the containment field, trying to see what lay beyond. Through the viewport, he caught glimpses of a structure so vast it defied comprehension. Metal corridors stretched in every direction, disappearing into darkness. Streams of ships flowed in and out of countless docking bays, each one large enough to swallow Earth's moon. This was Zirian Prime, the capital ship of the Zephyrian fleet. More than just a vessel, it was a mobile planet, home to over 50 million Zephyrians, and the seat of power for an empire that controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy. Marcus had read about it in intelligence reports, but seeing it in person was overwhelming. The scale was beyond anything humans had ever built. The containment field flickered and died. Immediately, for soldiers flanked Marcus, their weapons trained on his chest. He didn't resist, as they shackled his hands with energy cuffs that would deliver a painful shock if he moved too quickly. The lead soldier, distinguished by the silver scarring across his carapace, gestured for Marcus to follow. They moved through corridors that seemed designed to intimidate. The walls rose 30 feet above their heads, decorated with the preserved heads of alien species that had defied the Empire. Holographic displays showed real-time updates from across Zephyrian space. Conquered worlds, successful raids, tribute collected from subjugated species. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. But Marcus noticed something else in those displays, something that made his scientific mind race with possibilities. The numbers were wrong. Ship production was down. Several colonies had gone silent. Trade routes were being abandoned. The Empire was contracting, not expanding. Whatever the Zephyrians showed to the galaxy, the reality was different. They were struggling. The procession stopped before massive doors that rose like cathedral walls. Ancient Zephyrian script covered every inch of the metal, telling the story of the Empire's greatest victories. The doors split apart with a sound like thunder, revealing a throne room that could have held a small city. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne carved from the crystallized remains of a dead star, was Queen Vashra, the Eternal. She was massive even by Zephyrian standards, her carapace black as deep space and scarred by countless battles. 6 compound eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that made him feel like his soul was being dissected. 2 pairs of arms rested on the throne's armrests, while her third pair was folded across her chest in a gesture that Marcus somehow recognized as contemplative. Hundreds of Zephyrian nobles filled the spaces around the throne, their own compound eyes reflecting the chamber's dim lighting like a constellation of stars. The air hummed with their subsonic communications, a language of vibrations that human ears couldn't properly detect, but that Marcus felt in his bones. The guards forced Marcus to his knees before the throne. The queen studied him for long minutes, her head tilting from side to side in a gesture that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of a praying mantis examining its prey. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of absolute power, but also something else, something that sounded almost like curiosity. "So this is what humans look like up close," she said in perfect standard galactic, her words creating visible vibrations in the air. "Smaller than I expected. Weaker. More fragile." Marcus forced himself to meet her gaze, though every instinct screamed at him to look away. "Appearances can be deceiving, Your Majesty." A ripple of movement went through the assembled nobles. Several made threatening gestures with their claws. Speaking without permission to the queen was punishable by death. But Queen Vashra raised one hand, and the chamber fell silent. "Indeed they can," she said, and Marcus caught something in her tone that surprised him. Not anger at his boldness, but approval. "You are Marcus Chun, xenobiologist attached to the research vessel Meridian. Age 28 standard years. Born on Earth's moon colony. No family. No children. No one to mourn your death." The casual way she mentioned his death made Marcus's blood run cold, but he kept his expression neutral. "The Empire's intelligence network is impressive." "It needs to be," the Queen replied. "When dealing with a species as unpredictable as yours, we must know everything. Your weapons, your weaknesses, your motivations." She leaned forward slightly, her 6 eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. "But there is one thing about humans that our intelligence has never been able to explain." Marcus waited, sensing that this was the moment everything would either make sense or spiral completely out of control. "Why do you fight?" the Queen asked. "Your species has been in space for barely 50 years. You have no significant military, no advanced technology, no vast resources. Any rational species would submit to superior power. Yet humans continue to resist our expansion into their territory. You fight battles you cannot win against enemies you cannot defeat. Why?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus realized that his answer might determine not just his own fate, but potentially the future relationship between humanity and the Empire. He thought carefully before responding. "Because freedom isn't rational," he said finally. "It's necessary." Queen Vashra's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of laughter. But there was no humor in the sound. "Freedom," she repeated, as if the word tasted strange in her mouth. "An interesting concept. In 5,000 years of conquest, I have heard many species speak of freedom. They all submitted eventually. Humans are different," Marcus said, and immediately wondered if he was signing his own death warrant. "Perhaps," the queen said, "but that is not why you are here." She stood from her throne, her full height towering over the assembled court. When she moved, Marcus could see the ancient battle scars that covered her carapace, each one telling a story of violence and survival. "You are here because of a question that has haunted me for longer than your entire species has existed." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. Whatever was coming next, it was the real reason he had been brought here. Everything else had been preamble. Queen Vashra stepped down from her throne and approached Marcus directly, each footstep echoing through the vast chamber like a funeral drum. When she was close enough that he could see his reflection in her compound eyes, she asked the question that would change everything. "Tell me about my daughter." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared up at the queen, his mind racing. Daughter? The intelligence reports had never mentioned that Queen Vashra had any children. Zephyrian reproduction was notoriously secretive, but surely something that important would have been discovered. I don't understand," Marcus said carefully. "Your Majesty, I've never met your daughter. I didn't even know you had one." "Neither did I," Queen Vashra replied, and suddenly her voice carried a weight of pain that seemed to fill the entire chamber. "Until 3 days ago." The queen turned away from Marcus, pacing back toward her throne with movements that spoke of barely controlled emotion. The assembled nobles watched in silence, their own subsonic communications creating an undercurrent of tension that made the air itself feel heavy. 3 days ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected an unauthorized transmission from Sector 7G, the Queen continued. The transmission was in an unknown language, using technology that shouldn't exist. When our cryptographers finally decoded it, they discovered something impossible. She reached her throne and placed one clawed hand on its armrest, her knuckles whitening with the pressure she applied. The transmission was from someone claiming to be my daughter. Someone who said she had been living among humans for the past 15 years. Someone who begged me to stop the war against your species because she had learned to love them as family. Marcus felt the pieces of a puzzle clicking together in his mind, forming a picture so impossible that he almost rejected it outright. But the anguish in Queen Vashra's voice was real, and the implications were staggering. The transmission included detailed knowledge of the Empire's military codes, information that only someone with access to the highest levels of our government could possess, the Queen said. It also included this. She gestured with one hand, and a holographic display materialized in the air above the throne room. The image showed a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with features that were unmistakably human. She had dark hair and warm brown eyes, and she was wearing what looked like the uniform of the Colonial Defense Force. But there was something else in the image, something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. Around the woman's neck hung a pendant that gleamed with the same dark crystal as Queen Vashra's crown. And when she moved, the light caught her eyes in a way that revealed compound structures beneath the surface, structures that were definitely not human. "Her name is Zara," Queen Vashra said quietly. "And, according to the transmission, she has been living as a human since she was 5 years old." The Queen's 6 eyes fixed on Marcus again, and this time he could see the desperate hope hiding behind her imperial mask. "You study alien biology, human. You understand how species adapt and survive. You have spent your career learning to see beyond surface appearances to the truth that lies beneath." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "So, I ask you again, tell me about my daughter. Tell me how it is possible that she exists. Tell me what it means that she chooses to call humans her family." Marcus stared at the holographic image, his mind reeling with possibilities. The science alone was fascinating, hybrid genetics between species that had evolved on completely different worlds, adaptation mechanisms that allowed seamless integration with human society, the psychological implications of a Zephyrian child raised by humans. But beyond the science, he could see something that Queen Vashra might not have recognized yet. The young woman in the image didn't just look human. She carried herself like a human. Her expressions, her posture, even the way she held her head, all spoke of someone who had been shaped by human culture, human values, human love. And if that were true, then this moment wasn't just about a mother searching for her lost child. It was about the potential for understanding between two species that had been enemies for decades. It was about the possibility that hatred could be overcome by something stronger. It was about hope. Marcus looked up at Queen Vashra, seeing past the scars and the armor and the imperial authority to the mother underneath. When he spoke, his words came not from scientific knowledge or diplomatic training, but from the most human part of himself, the part that understood what it meant to love someone enough to cross the entire galaxy to find them. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "before I can tell you about your daughter, I need to tell you about the humans who raised her." Queen Vashra's compound eyes narrowed as she processed Marcus's words. The assembled nobles shifted restlessly, their subsonic communications creating a buzz of confusion and anticipation. No one had expected the human to take control of the conversation, but something in his tone had captured the queen's attention completely. "Speak," she commanded, settling back on her throne with the fluid grace of a predator preparing to strike. "But choose your words carefully, human. My patience has limits." Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that everything he said from this moment forward could determine the fate of two entire species. He had studied Zephyrian culture extensively during his xenobiology training, but academic knowledge was very different from standing before their absolute ruler and try to explain the inexplicable. "Your Majesty, to understand your daughter, you first have to understand something about humans that your intelligence reports probably missed," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the vast throne room. "We're not just fighters. We're not just primitives who stumbled into space technology. We're adopters." The queen's head tilted slightly, a gesture Marcus was beginning to recognize as genuine curiosity. "Adopters?" she asked. "Every human civilization in history has been built on the same foundation." Marcus continued, warming to his subject. "We take in those who don't belong anywhere else. Orphans, refugees, outcasts from other tribes or nations or species. We don't just tolerate them, we make them family." One of the nobles, a particularly scarred veteran whose missing arm spoke of countless battles, stepped forward with a sound of derision. "Preposterous," he growled in heavily accented Standard Galactic. "No species willingly weakens itself by accepting inferior members." Marcus turned to face the noble directly, and for a moment the human's calm confidence seemed to fill the enormous chamber. "That's where you're wrong," he said simply. "We don't see them as inferior. We see them as potential." He turned back to Queen Vashra, gesturing to the holographic image of Zara that still floated above the throne room. 15 years ago, someone found a 5-year-old child who clearly wasn't human. They could have turned her over to authorities. They could have sold her to researchers. They could have abandoned her to survive on her own. Instead, they did what humans have done for thousands of years. They brought her home. The queen leaned forward, her massive form radiating an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Continue," she said softly. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, drawing on memories of his own childhood in Luna City, where he had grown up alongside children from dozens of different worlds. When he opened them again, his voice carried the weight of personal experience. They would have given her a name, probably choosing something that sounded right to their ears, but that she could pronounce easily. They would have taught her to speak their language, but they also would have encouraged her to remember any word she knew from her original home. They would have celebrated her differences while helping her fit in. The holographic image shifted, showing different pictures of Zara at various ages. In one, she appeared to be about 10 years old, standing with a human family at what looked like a graduation ceremony. In another, She was wearing an athletic uniform, her hybrid strength clearly giving her advantages in whatever sport she was playing. In each image, she was surrounded by humans who looked at her not with fear or suspicion, but with obvious love and pride. Your daughter didn't just survive among humans, Your Majesty, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. She thrived. And the reason she thrived is because humans have a gift that most species lack. We can love someone not despite their differences, but because of them. Queen Vashra's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of agitation that made several nobles step back nervously. You speak of love as if it were a strategy, she said, her tone dangerous. As if emotion could overcome biology, could bridge the gap between species that evolved on different worlds under different suns. Marcus shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not a strategy, Your Majesty. An instinct. Humans bond with anything that needs protection. We've domesticated predators that could kill us, raised young from species that most rational beings would consider competitors, adopted children from races that our governments might be at war with. It's not logical, but it's what makes us human. He paused, studying the Queen's face for any sign of understanding. Your daughter's message said she learned to love humans as family. But I guarantee you, Your Majesty, that the feeling was mutual. Wherever she grew up, whoever raised her, they love her just as fiercely as if she had been born to them. They probably don't even think of her as Zephyrian anymore. To them, she's just Zara. The throne room fell silent except for the subtle hum of the ship's systems and the barely audible subsonic communications of the assembled nobles. Queen Vashra sat motionless for long minutes, her 6 eyes fixed on the images of her daughter living a life the Queen could barely comprehend. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that Marcus had to strain to hear her. "Show me the transmission," she commanded. A new holographic display materialized, this one showing not still images but a recording. The young woman, Zura, appeared to be speaking from what looked like a small, cluttered apartment. Behind her, Marcus could see the kinds of personal touches that marked a human living space. Photographs, books, small decorative objects that served no practical purpose but that made a place feel like home. Zara herself looked nervous but determined. When she spoke, her words were in perfect Zephyrian, but her accent was distinctly human, and her body language reflected human emotional patterns rather than Zephyrian ones. "Mother," she began, and the simple word hit Queen Vashra like a physical blow. "I know you don't know me. I know this must be impossible to believe. But I am your daughter, Zurathes Veltar Vashra, taken from the Imperial Nursery Chambers 15 years ago during the raid on Nexus Station." The Queen's breathing became audibly labored, her massive chest rising and falling with increasing rapidity. "I have lived among humans since I was 5 years old," Zara continued. "They found me in the wreckage of a transport ship, injured and alone. They could have left me to die. Instead, they saved me. They healed me. They gave me a life I never could have imagined." The recording showed Zura reaching up to touch the crystal pendant around her neck, the same pendant that Marcus had noticed earlier. "I kept this," she said, holding the pendant toward the camera. "It was the only thing I had from before. I always knew I was different, but my family, my human family, taught me that different didn't mean lesser. They taught me that strength comes not from conquest, but from compassion. Not from fear, but from understanding." Queen Vashra made a sound deep in her throat, something between a growl and a sob. "I have watched the war between our peoples for years," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger. "I have seen good humans die because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I have seen Zephyrian soldiers who were just following orders, fighting an enemy they don't understand. And I have realized that I am in a unique position to speak for both sides." The young woman leaned closer to the camera, her hybrid eyes reflecting the light in a way that was definitely not human, but that somehow made her seem more vulnerable rather than more alien. "Mother, I know you see humans as enemies. Your intelligence reports probably describe us as violent, unpredictable, dangerous. But they're incomplete. Yes, humans can be violent when threatened. Yes, They're unpredictable because they make decisions based on emotion as much as logic. But they're not dangerous to those they consider family. She paused, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. Another distinctly human response that her Zephyrian biology shouldn't have been capable of producing. The family that raised me has 3 other children, Zara said. 2 humans born to them, and 1 Andorian refugee they adopted when his homeworld was destroyed. They never treated any of us differently. When I started showing signs of Zephyrian strength and reflexes, they didn't fear me. They helped me learn to control those gifts. When my compound vision began developing, they didn't see it as alien. They saw it as an advantage that could help me protect others. Queen Vashra stood abruptly from her throne, her movement so sudden that every noble in the chamber instinctively reached for weapons. But the queen wasn't responding to an external threat. She was grappling with emotions that her species had trained out of their ruling class centuries ago. When I turned 18, they sat me down and told me the truth about where they had found me. Zara continued from the recording. They gave me a choice. I could stay with them and live as a human, or I could try to find my way back to Zephyrian space. They would support whatever I decided. The queen's hands clenched into fists, her claws extending unconsciously. I chose to stay, Zara said simply. Not because I was ashamed of my heritage, but because I had found something among humans that I wasn't sure existed anywhere else in the galaxy. I had found unconditional love. Marcus watched Queen Vashra's face as those words sank in. He could see the exact moment when the implications hit her. Not just that her daughter was alive, but that she had chosen to remain with humans because they had given her something that the mighty Zephyrian Empire, with all its power and glory, apparently could not. But now I see the war escalating, Zara continued. I see my 2 peoples destroying each other over misunderstandings and ancient prejudices. And I realize that my choice has given me a responsibility. I am the bridge between 2 worlds. I am proof that Zephyrians and humans can not only coexist, but can love each other as family. The recording showed Zara standing up, and Marcus noticed that she moved with the confident grace of someone who had trained extensively in combat. Her human family had not just accepted her alien heritage, they had helped her develop it. So I am asking you, Mother, not as the queen of the Zephyrian Empire, but as the woman who gave me life, to meet with the human leadership. Let me arrange a meeting where both sides can speak honestly about what they want, what they fear, and what they hope for the future. Let me show you the humans who raised me, so you can see for yourself what kind of people they really are. Zara's voice became urgent, almost pleading. The war can end, Mother, not through conquest or submission, but through understanding. The humans who raised me are not unique. Their capacity for love, for acceptance, for making family from strangers is something that defines their entire species. And I believe that Zephyrians, if given the chance, could learn to see that gift as a strength rather than a weakness. The recording ended with Zara reaching toward the camera, her hand extended as if trying to touch her mother across the impossible distance between them. I love you, Mother, even though I have never met you. I love you because you gave me life, and because that life led me to people who taught me what love truly means. Please don't let that gift be destroyed by a war that doesn't have to continue. The holographic display faded, leaving the throne room in stunned silence. Queen Vashra stood motionless for several minutes, her massive form silhouetted against the crystalline throne. When she finally moved, it was to turn her 6 eyes directly on Marcus. She speaks of love as if it were a weapon that could end wars, the queen said quietly, as if emotion were more powerful than fleets and armies. Marcus met her gaze steadily. In human experience, Your Majesty, love is the only weapon that has ever permanently ended a war. Everything else just creates a pause until the next battle. The queen's mandibles clicked together thoughtfully. And you believe this? You think that what your species feels for my daughter could somehow overcome millennia of evolution, eons of territorial instinct, the fundamental drive to destroy potential competitors? Marcus thought of his own childhood, of the dozens of foster children who had passed through his family home on Luna City. He thought of colonies that had welcomed refugees from destroyed worlds, of human soldiers who had died protecting alien civilians they had never met, of the countless small acts of kindness that defined humanity's expansion into the galaxy. "Your Majesty," he said softly, "I don't just believe it. I've lived it. I've seen it work over and over again. The family that raised your daughter didn't overcome their evolution. They followed it. Humans evolved to be pack animals, to form bonds that transcend genetics. What makes us dangerous as enemies is exactly what makes us powerful as allies." Queen Vashra walked slowly back to her throne, but instead of sitting down, she placed both hands on its armrests and leaned forward, studying Marcus with an intensity that made him feel transparent. "If what you say is true," she said carefully, "if humans truly have this capacity for adoption, for making family from strangers, then my daughter's choice makes sense. But it also creates a problem that threatens the very foundation of my empire." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of problem, Your Majesty?" The Queen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of absolute authority. "If humans can transform a Zephyrian princess into someone who chooses love over conquest, if they can take the daughter of the Empire's greatest warrior and teach her that compassion is stronger than fear, then what does that say about the Empire itself?" She straightened to her full height, her scarred carapace gleaming in the throne room's dim lighting. "More importantly, human, what does it say about me?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended over the entire throne room. Marcus felt the weight of hundreds of Zephyrian eyes watching him, waiting for his response to what might be the most dangerous question ever posed by the galaxy's most powerful ruler. One wrong word could not only cost him his life, but potentially doom any chance of peace between their species. But as he looked up at Queen Vashra, Marcus saw something that gave him hope. Behind the imperial mask, behind the scars, and the armor, and the terrible authority, he saw a mother grappling with the possibility that everything she had built her life around might be wrong. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "it says that you are capable of change." The noble's subsonic communications exploded into a cacophony of vibrations that made the very air seem to buzz with outrage. Several of the more aggressive warriors took half steps forward, their weapons shifting toward ready positions. But Queen Vashra held up one massive hand, and the chamber fell silent instantly. "Elaborate," she commanded, her voice carrying a deadly calm that somehow felt more dangerous than any show of anger. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that he was about to either save two civilizations or trigger the total destruction of his own species. "Your daughter's message included something that your intelligence analysts probably missed," he said, gesturing toward where the holographic recording had been. "She didn't just say she loved the humans who raised her. She said she loved you, even though she had never met you." The Queen's compound eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. "That kind of love doesn't come from nowhere, Your Majesty," Marcus continued. "It has to be taught, demonstrated, modeled by the people who raise a child. The fact that your daughter is capable of loving someone she has never met tells me that the humans who raised her showed her what that looked like." He paused, watching the Queen's face for any sign of understanding. "But more importantly, it tells me that she carries something inside her that was already there when they found her. Something that came from you." Queen Vashra's breathing became audibly labored, her massive chest rising and falling with increasing intensity. Around the throne room, the assembled nobles shifted nervously, recognizing signs of emotional distress in their ruler that most of them had never seen before. "You're suggesting," the Queen said slowly, "that my capacity for love somehow survived 15 years of separation, somehow transmitted itself through genetics to a child who grew up among an entirely different species." Marcus shook his head. "I'm suggesting something more radical than that, Your Majesty. I'm suggesting that your capacity for love never went anywhere. I'm suggesting that everything you've built, this empire, this throne, this entire civilization, was built to protect something precious. And that something is still there, waiting for you to remember what it was. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Queen Vashra stood motionless, her 6 eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the throne room's walls. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of memory that seemed to age her before their eyes. "Tell me, human," she said quietly, "what do you know of Zephyrian reproduction?" Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He was a xenobiologist, but Zephyrian reproductive practices were among the most closely guarded secrets in the galaxy. What little information existed was fragmentary and often contradictory. "Very little, Your Majesty," he admitted. "Your species guards that information carefully." Queen Vashra made a sound deep in her throat that might have been laughter, but it carried no humor. "Of course we do," she said bitterly, "because the truth would reveal the greatest weakness of the most feared empire in the galaxy." She turned away from Marcus, pacing toward the massive windows that looked out into the depths of space. As she moved, her voice took on the cadence of someone telling a story that she had never been able to share. "Zephyrian females lay hundreds of eggs at a time," she began, her words carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite being spoken barely above a whisper. "But only a tiny fraction of those eggs ever develop into viable offspring. Our reproduction rate is so low that every successful birth is considered a miracle." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to click together in his mind. When a Zephyrian queen produces a viable egg, it is immediately taken to the imperial nurseries, Queen Vashra continued. "The young are raised communally, taught to value the empire above all else, trained from birth to see conquest as the highest virtue and emotion as weakness." She stopped before one of the windows, her reflection ghost-like in the transparent metal. "I have laid eggs hundreds of times over the past 3 centuries, she said, and Marcus could hear the pain in her voice growing with each word. "Exactly 7 have developed into viable offspring. Of those 7, 6 died in combat before reaching adulthood, sacrificing themselves for the glory of the empire." The queen's hands pressed against the window, her claws leaving scratches in the metal. "Zara was my 7th child, my last chance at leaving a legacy beyond conquest and fear. And 15 years ago, she was taken from the Imperial nurseries during a human raid on Nexus Station." Marcus felt his breath catch. A human raid? That changed everything he thought he knew about how Zara had come to be raised by humans. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the intelligence report said that humans had kidnapped Zephyrian civilians. They never mentioned, because I ordered the truth suppressed." Queen Vashra cut him off, her voice like a knife through the air. "Do you know what it would do to Imperial morale if the galaxy discovered that the Queen's own daughter had been captured by the species we claim to despise above all others?" She turned away from the window, and Marcus saw something in her expression that shocked him. Not rage, not hatred, but grief so profound that it seemed to emanate from her very bones. "For 15 years, I have told myself that my daughter was dead," the Queen said. "It was easier than imagining what humans might do to a Zephyrian child. Your species' reputation for violence made it simple to assume the worst." Marcus felt a surge of protective anger on behalf of his species, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Your Majesty, human military actions might sometimes be violent, but humans don't make war on children. Ever. It's one of our few absolute moral lines." Queen Vashra's mandibles clicked together in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as skepticism. "And you took my daughter," she said. "No," Marcus replied firmly. "We found her. There's a difference." The Queen's 6 eyes focused on him with laser intensity. "Explain." Marcus thought back to the recording, to the way Zara had described her rescue. The details painted a very different picture than what Queen Vashra seemed to believe. "Your daughter said she was found in the wreckage of a transport ship," Marcus said. "Not taken from a nursery, not kidnapped during a battle. Found in wreckage, injured and alone." He could see understanding beginning to dawn in the Queen's expression. "The humans who found her weren't soldiers, Your Majesty. They were probably rescue workers, or maybe just civilians who responded to a distress call. They saw an injured child, and their first instinct wasn't to see her as an enemy. It was to help her. Queen Vashra's breathing became more labored, her massive form seeming to struggle under the weight of implications she was only beginning to process. "You're saying the humans saved my daughter's life?" she said slowly. "I'm saying the humans did what humans do," Marcus replied. "They saw someone who needed help, and they helped." The fact that she was Zephyrian probably never even occurred to them as a reason not to. The throne room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Less hostile, more contemplative. Marcus could see the queen wrestling with concepts that challenged everything she had built her empire on. "If what you're suggesting is true," she said finally, "then humans didn't just take my daughter from me. They gave her something I couldn't." "What's that, Your Majesty?" Queen Vashra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of a revelation that was reshaping her understanding of everything. A childhood. The admission hit the throne room like a physical force. Several of the assembled nobles stepped back involuntarily, their subsonic communications creating a buzz of confusion and alarm. The idea that the imperial system of child-rearing might be flawed was heresy of the highest order. But Queen Vashra seemed oblivious to their reactions. Her attention was focused entirely inward, grappling with memories and possibilities that she had suppressed for centuries. "Zephyrian young are taken from their mothers within hours of hatching," she continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "They are raised by specialists, trained by warriors, taught to value strength above all else. Emotion is conditioned out of them through rigorous discipline. Individual bonds are discouraged to prevent weakness." She turned to look directly at Marcus, and for the first time since he had entered the throne room, she looked vulnerable. "I have never had a conversation with any of my children that was not about military strategy or imperial duty," she said. "I have never seen them play or laugh or express joy about anything that was not related to conquest. I have never held them when they were afraid, or comforted them when they were sad, or simply enjoyed their company." Marcus felt his heart breaking for this alien queen who was realizing what she had sacrificed in the name of imperial strength. "Your daughter's message said that her human family celebrated her differences while helping her fit in," he said gently. "She talked about learning to control her Zephyrian gifts, about being supported in whatever choice she made about her future. That's what a childhood should be, a chance to discover who you are and what you want to become." Queen Vashra made a sound that was definitely not human, but that Marcus somehow recognized as crying. The most powerful being in a quarter of the galaxy was weeping for the relationship with her daughter that she had never been allowed to have. "She loves me," the queen said, her words barely audible. "Even though I never held her, never sang to her, never simply enjoyed watching her grow. She loves me because humans taught her that love can exist across any distance, can survive any separation, can overcome any difference." Marcus nodded, feeling tears forming in his own eyes. "That's what humans do, Your Majesty. We love people not because they earn it, but because they exist. And we teach the children we raise that they are worthy of love just for being themselves." Queen Vashra stood in silence for several minutes, her massive form seeming to shrink under the weight of emotions that her species had spent millennia trying to eliminate. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a resolution that made the very air seem to vibrate. "I want to see her," she said simply. "I want to meet the humans who gave my daughter the childhood I couldn't. I want to understand how they accomplished something that the entire Zephyrian Empire was unable to do." Marcus felt a surge of hope so powerful it was almost painful. "Your Majesty, I believe that can be arranged. But it would require a ceasefire, a suspension of hostilities while arrangements are made." "Done," Queen Vashra said without hesitation. The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled nobles. Several of them stepped forward, their agitation clear in every movement. "Your Majesty," one of them said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had served the Empire for centuries. Such a decision cannot be made without consultation with the military council. The implications for our strategic position are irrelevant. Queen Vashra cut him off, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. This is not a military decision. It is a personal one. She turned back to Marcus, and he could see that something fundamental had changed in her expression. The cold calculation of an imperial ruler had been replaced by the desperate hope of a mother. "But there's one thing I need to know before I can take that step," she said. "One question that will determine whether this path leads to peace or to something far more dangerous." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What question, Your Majesty?" Queen Vashra's 6 eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him feel like she was looking directly into his soul. "If humans are truly capable of the unconditional love you described, if they really can make family from strangers and love people despite their differences," she said slowly, "then why are they so feared by every other species in the galaxy? Why do intelligence reports from a dozen different civilizations describe humans as unpredictable, dangerous, potentially threatening to galactic stability?" Marcus felt the weight of that question settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. Because she was right, and they both knew it. Humanity's reputation in galactic politics was complicated at best, actively hostile at worst. And if he was going to convince this alien queen to trust his species with the future of both their civilizations, he was going to have to explain the paradox that lay at the heart of human nature. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "that's because the same capacity that makes us able to love unconditionally also makes us absolutely ruthless when protecting those we love." Queen Vashra's mandibles clicked together thoughtfully. "Show me," she commanded. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that everything he said next would determine not just his own fate, but the future relationship between humanity and the most powerful empire in the galaxy. Queen Vashra's question had cut straight to the paradox that defined his species. How could humans be both loving adopters and feared warriors at the same time? "Your Majesty," he began, "what I'm about to tell you might be difficult to understand because Zephyrian culture values strength above all else. But for humans, love and violence aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin." The Queen's compound eyes narrowed, and Marcus could feel the attention of every noble in the vast chamber focusing on his words. "Consider a human parent," Marcus continued, his voice growing more confident as he found his rhythm. "They will spend years patiently teaching their child to walk, to speak, to think for themselves. They will sacrifice sleep, comfort, resources, even their own safety to nurture that child. They will love that child unconditionally, forgive any mistake, celebrate every small victory." He paused, meeting Queen Vashra's gaze directly. "But threaten that child, and this same parent will become the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. They will fight with a ferocity that defies logic, use tactics that ignore their own survival, pursue vengeance with a persistence that terrifies other species. Not because they're inherently violent, but because protecting their family is the highest expression of love they know." Marcus gestured toward the space where Zara's holographic message had played. "Your daughter said that her human family helped her develop her Zephyrian abilities. They didn't try to suppress her natural strength or speed. They taught her to control it. But more than that, they taught her that those abilities exist to protect others. That's the human way. We don't eliminate capacity for violence. We direct it toward protecting what we love." Queen Vashra leaned forward on her throne, her massive form radiating an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "You're saying that human aggression is defensive rather than expansionist," she said slowly. "That you fight not to conquer, but to protect." "Exactly," Marcus replied. "And that's why other species find us so unpredictable. Traditional military doctrine assumes that aggression is about territory, resources, strategic advantage. But human aggression is about family. And family, to humans, isn't limited by genetics or species or even physical proximity. He thought of the colonies he had studied during his xenobiology training, the mixed communities where humans lived alongside dozens of different alien species in harmony. A human will fight to the death for someone they met 5 minutes ago if they see that person as needing protection, Marcus continued. They'll adopt refugees from species they've never encountered before. They'll risk their own safety to rescue civilians from worlds they've never visited. Not because it serves some strategic purpose, but because once humans decide that someone is family, they will move heaven and earth to keep that person safe. One of the nobles, a scarred veteran whose missing eye spoke of countless battles, stepped forward with a growl of skepticism. Impossible, he said in heavily accented Standard Galactic. No species sacrifices for strangers without expecting something in return. What do humans gain from this alleged altruism? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since entering the throne room, he felt completely confident in his answer. We gain family, he said simply. Every person we help becomes part of our extended tribe. Every refugee we take and become someone who will fight alongside us if we're threatened. Every act of kindness creates a bond that transcends politics or geography or even species differences. The noble's mandibles clicked dismissively, but Marcus could see uncertainty in his posture. You're describing a strategy of cultural conquest, the veteran said, using emotion to subvert other species' independence. No, Marcus replied firmly. I'm describing survival through connection. Humans don't assimilate other cultures. We synthesize with them. We take the best aspects of every species we encounter and incorporate them into our own communities while encouraging those species to maintain their unique identities. He turned back to Queen Vashra, who was watching the exchange with fascination. Your Majesty, your daughter didn't become less Zephyrian by living among humans. She became more herself, someone who could honor her heritage while choosing her own path. That's what humans offer, the freedom to be exactly who you are while knowing you'll be loved unconditionally. The queen stood slowly, her movement causing every noble in the chamber to tense. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone grappling with concepts that challenged everything she had believed about the galaxy. If what you say is true, she said carefully, then the war between our peoples is not about territory or resources or even ideology. It's about two completely different definitions of strength. Marcus nodded. Zephyrians see strength as the ability to stand alone, to conquer opposition, to maintain control through superior force. Humans see strength as the ability to build connections, to create family from strangers, to protect others even at cost to themselves. And these definitions are incompatible, Queen Vashra said, but there was a question in her voice. They were, Marcus agreed, until your daughter proved otherwise. He gestured again toward where Zara's message had appeared. She combines both definitions of strength, Your Majesty. She has the physical power and tactical intelligence of a Zephyrian warrior, but she uses those abilities in service of human values. She stands as proof that the two approaches don't have to be opposites. They could be complementary. Queen Vashra began pacing, her massive form moving with the restless energy of someone whose worldview was being fundamentally reorganized. But if humans are capable of adopting anyone, of making family from any species they encounter, she said, why have they been so resistant to Zephyrian expansion? Why haven't they simply welcomed us, as they apparently welcome others? The question hit Marcus like a physical blow, because it forced him to confront the darker side of human nature. He was silent for several seconds, choosing his words carefully. Because, Your Majesty, humans only extend that welcome to those who aren't trying to hurt their existing family, he said quietly. And the Zephyrian Empire has been actively hunting and killing humans for decades. The throne room fell completely silent. Marcus could feel the weight of hundreds of alien eyes upon him as he continued. Humans would gladly have welcomed Zephyrians as allies, as trading partners, even as adopted family members, he said, his voice growing stronger. But the Empire chose conquest instead of cooperation. You declared humans to be enemies before we even knew you existed. You attacked our colonies without provocation, captured our civilians without explanation, made war on us simply because we dared to exist in space you considered yours. Queen Vashra stopped pacing, her 6 eyes focusing on Marcus with laser intensity. And how did humans respond? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Marcus met her gaze without flinching. The same way they always respond when their family is threatened. They fought back with everything they had. Not to conquer Zephyrian space, not to destroy your empire, but to protect the colonies and civilians you were attacking. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Your Majesty, in 50 years of human space exploration, we have never started a war with another species. We have ended several wars, sometimes through diplomacy and sometimes through force, but we have never been the aggressor. Because humans don't fight for territory or resources or glory, we fight for people. The Queen's breathing became labored as the implications of his words hit her. You're saying that if the Empire stopped attacking human territory, humans would stop fighting back, she said slowly. I'm saying more than that, Marcus replied. I'm saying that if the Empire genuinely sought peace, humans would actively help you achieve whatever goals you're really trying to accomplish through conquest. One of the younger nobles, her carapace bearing the marks of recent battlefield promotion, stepped forward with a sound of disbelief. Preposterous, she said. Why would humans help their enemies? Marcus turned to face her directly, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Because they wouldn't be enemies anymore, and because humans have discovered something that most species never learn. Helping others become stronger makes you stronger too. He thought of the dozens of human colonies he had visited, each one a unique blend of human culture and local alien influences. Every species humans have encountered has made human civilization richer, more diverse, more capable, he continued. We've learned mathematics from the Zolarians, agricultural techniques from the Verdani, engineering principles from the Corvani, not through conquest or cultural assimilation, but through genuine partnership. Queen Vashra had stopped moving entirely, her massive form frozen in what Marcus was beginning to recognize as deep thought. And you believe Zephyrians could contribute something valuable to this cultural synthesis? She asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time, it was completely genuine. Your Majesty, Zephyrians have developed the most sophisticated military organization in galactic history. Your logistics networks span hundreds of star systems. Your engineering capabilities allow you to build mobile planets like this ship. Your species has survived and thrived for millennia through discipline, strategic thinking, and absolute dedication to shared goals. He gestured around the vast throne room, taking in the assembled nobles and the magnificent architecture that surrounded them. Humans could learn incredible amounts from Zephyrian organizational methods, strategic planning, long-term thinking. And in return, humans could offer something that the Empire has never had, the ability to grow through cooperation rather than conquest. The Queen's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of intense mental activity. You're describing a fundamental restructuring of how the Empire operates, she said. Moving from expansion through force to expansion through alliance. I'm describing evolution, Marcus corrected gently. The same kind of adaptation that allowed your daughter to thrive in human society. She didn't abandon her Zephyrian nature. She found new ways to express it that created strength instead of conflict. Queen Vashra was quiet for so long that Marcus began to wonder if he had finally pushed too far. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight of possibility that seemed to fill the entire chamber. There is something you need to understand about Zephyrian expansion, she said slowly. Something that even our own people don't fully realize. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Whatever was coming next, it was important enough that the Queen was willing to reveal state secrets to a human prisoner. The Empire is dying, she said simply, and the words hit the throne room like a physical blow. Our reproduction rate has been declining for centuries. Our resource base is stretched beyond sustainability. Our military is powerful, but it's also the only thing holding together a civilization that is slowly collapsing from within. The assembled nobles shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with their ruler's unprecedented candor. Conquest has been our response to decline, the queen continued. We expand because we must constantly acquire new resources to replace what we consume. We take territory because we need space for a population that is slowly shrinking. We fight because the alternative is admitting that the mighty Zephyrian Empire is not as eternal as we pretend. Marcus felt pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking together in his mind. But if humans could offer partnership instead of conquest, he said slowly, if they could share resources and technology and knowledge freely rather than through subjugation, then the empire could survive without expansion. Queen Vashra finished. Our population could stabilize through cultural exchange rather than biological reproduction. Our civilization could grow through synthesis rather than conquest. She turned to face Marcus directly, and he could see hope warring with fear in her alien features. But such a transformation would require something that no Zephyrian ruler has ever possessed, she said quietly. What's that, Your Majesty? Queen Vashra's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every word carried the weight of a revolution. Faith that another species could be trusted with the survival of our people. The silence that followed Queen Vashra's admission was so profound that Marcus could hear the subtle vibrations of the massive ship's engines through the floor. Around the throne room, nobles who had spent centuries believing in the absolute supremacy of their empire stood frozen, grappling with the revelation that everything they had fought for might have been a symptom of decline rather than a sign of strength. But Marcus saw something else in that silence: opportunity. The queen had just admitted the Empire's greatest weakness to a human prisoner, which meant she was either preparing to kill him to preserve the secret, or she was genuinely considering the possibility of change. And, given everything that had been said about her daughter, Marcus was betting on the latter. Your Majesty, he said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly through the vast chamber. Faith isn't something that can be granted or demanded. It has to be earned. But humans have a different word for what you're describing. Queen Vashra's 6 eyes focused on him with laser intensity. What word? Hope, Marcus said simply. The belief that things can be better than they are, even when you don't know exactly how to make that happen. He stood slowly, knowing that the movement might be interpreted as threatening, but unable to remain kneeling for what he was about to say. Your daughter's message wasn't just about love, Your Majesty. It was about hope. She didn't contact you because she had all the answers, but because she believed that finding answers was possible. She reached across 15 years of separation and the entire width of a war zone because she had faith that you could change. The queen's breathing became visibly labored, her massive chest rising and falling with increasing intensity. And you believe this as well? She asked. You think that an empire built on 5,000 years of conquest could simply transform itself? Marcus thought of his own species' history, the wars, the genocides, the countless cycles of violence that had nearly destroyed human civilization before they learned to reach beyond their homeworld. He thought of the dozens of former enemies who were now humanity's closest allies, the species that had once seemed incompatibly different, but had found common ground through patient effort and mutual respect. Your Majesty, 50 years ago, humans thought faster-than-light travel was impossible. 30 years ago, we thought peaceful coexistence with the Andorian collective was a fantasy. 20 years ago, the idea of joint human-Zolarian research stations seemed absurd. Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. The one thing humans have learned about impossible things is that they have a tendency to become possible when people stop focusing on why they can't work and start figuring out how they might. Queen Vashra stood from her throne, her movement causing a ripple of tension through the assembled nobles. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of possibility that seemed to transform the very air of the chamber. Show me, she said. Marcus felt his heart skip. Your Majesty? Show me how this impossible thing might work. The queen clarified, beginning to pace with the restless energy of someone whose entire worldview was being reconstructed. If humans and Zephyrians were to attempt this partnership, how would it begin? What would the first steps look like? Marcus's mind raced. He was a xenobiologist, not a diplomat or military strategist. But he had spent years studying how different species learn to coexist, and he had observed enough successful partnerships to understand the basic principles. It would start with your daughter, he said. She's already proven that Zephyrian-human cooperation is possible. She could serve as a liaison, a translator not just of languages, but of cultures and expectations. The queen nodded slowly. Continue. We would need a neutral meeting ground, Marcus continued, warming to the subject. Somewhere that neither species controls, where representatives could meet without either side feeling threatened or disadvantaged. And we would need to start small, joint research projects, maybe, or collaborative responses to humanitarian crises that affect both our territories. One of the younger nobles stepped forward, her scarred carapace gleaming in the throne room's lighting. And what would prevent humans from using such cooperation to gather intelligence about our defenses, our weaknesses, our strategic capabilities? She demanded. Marcus turned to face her directly, recognizing the question as a legitimate concern rather than simple hostility. The same thing that would prevent Zephyrians from doing the same thing, he replied. Mutual vulnerability. True partnership requires both sides to accept risk, to share information that could be dangerous if the relationship failed. It's not about trust, it's about commitment to making the partnership succeed. Queen Vashra stopped pacing, her attention focusing entirely on Marcus's words. Explain, she commanded. Human military units integrate with partner forces, creating bonds that transcend political boundaries. He gestured toward the space where Zara's message had appeared. Your daughter is the perfect example, Your Majesty. She represents both species, which means she has a vested interest in both species surviving and thriving. She can't betray humanity without betraying her adopted family. And she can't betray the Zephyrian Empire without betraying her biological heritage. She is quite literally invested in peace. The queen's mandibles clicked together thoughtfully. And you believe other such bonds could be created? I believe they're inevitable, Marcus replied with growing confidence. Humans don't just tolerate diversity, we celebrate it. Any Zephyrian who spent time in human space would be valued for their unique perspectives, their different approaches to problem solving, their alternative ways of organizing society. And humans living among Zephyrians would bring fresh ideas, new technologies, different methods of building community. Marcus paused, struck by a sudden realization. But there's something more important than any of that, Your Majesty. Something that could transform both our civilizations in ways we can't even imagine yet. Queen Vashra leaned forward, her massive form radiating intense curiosity. What? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since entering the throne room, he felt genuinely excited rather than simply hopeful. Children, he said simply. Not hybrids like your daughter, but children raised from birth in mixed communities, exposed from their earliest moments to both human and Zephyrian values, languages, ways of thinking. The queen's breathing stopped entirely for several seconds. You're talking about a generation that would be truly bicultural, she said slowly. I'm talking about a generation that wouldn't see any contradiction between Zephyrian discipline and human compassion, between imperial organization and individual choice, between strategic thinking and emotional intelligence, Marcus replied. Children who could become leaders of both civilizations because they would understand both at a fundamental level. The throne room erupted in subsonic communications as the assembled nobles grappled with concepts that challenged everything they'd been taught about cultural purity and species superiority. But Queen Vashra held up one massive hand, and silence returned instantly. Such children would be remarkable, she said quietly. But they would also be vulnerable. Neither fully human nor fully Zephyrian. They might be rejected by both societies. Marcus shook his head, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. Your Majesty, I grew up on Luna City, in a community where human children played alongside young Andorians, Zalarians, Verdani, and a dozen other species. The children never saw differences as barriers. They saw them as advantages. The Andorian kids were better at mathematics. The Zalarian kids could see patterns the rest of us missed. The Verdani kids understood biological systems intuitively. He thought of his own childhood friends, many of whom had gone on to become leaders in their respective fields precisely because of their multicultural backgrounds. By the time those children grew up, they didn't just tolerate diversity, they required it. They couldn't imagine working in monocultural environments because they had learned that the best solutions come from combining different perspectives. They became bridges between species, translators of not just languages, but entire ways of understanding reality. Queen Vashra was silent for long minutes, her 6 eyes distant as she contemplated possibilities that had never occurred to her before. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a mixture of wonder and terror. You're describing the end of the Zephyrian Empire as it has existed for millennia, she said. Marcus nodded solemnly. Yes, Your Majesty. But I'm also describing the beginning of something that could be far greater. Not just a Zephyrian Empire or a human civilization, but a partnership that combines the best aspects of both while transcending the limitations of either. The queen turned to face her assembled nobles, and Marcus could see centuries of imperial authority warring with maternal love and desperate hope. You all heard the human's words, she said, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. You understand what he is proposing. Speak honestly. Can such a transformation preserve what is essential about our people while allowing us to survive and grow? The silence stretched for several minutes as nobles who had never been asked for honest opinions struggled to formulate responses. Finally, the scarred veteran who had questioned Marcus earlier stepped forward. Your Majesty, he said slowly, the human speaks of partnership, but what he describes sounds like absorption. If Zephyrian young are raised alongside humans, if our military integrates with theirs, if our technology merges with theirs, what remains that is distinctly Zephyrian? It was a fair question, and Marcus could see that Queen Vashra was genuinely considering it. But before she could respond, another voice spoke from the back of the chamber. What remains is choice. Every head turned to see who had spoken. The voice belonged to a younger noble, one whose carapace bore the marks of recent promotion and whose stance suggested uncertainty about speaking in such company. But her words had captured everyone's attention. Explain, Queen Vashra commanded. The young noble stepped forward, her movements careful but determined. Your Majesty, for 5,000 years, Zephyrians have had only one choice: serve the Empire or die. Our young are raised in imperial nurseries, trained for imperial service, and expected to sacrifice themselves for imperial glory. But what if they could choose their own paths while still honoring their heritage? She gestured toward the space where Zara's message had appeared. Your daughter chose to contact you, Your Majesty. Not because she was ordered to, not because it served some strategic purpose, but because she wanted to, and in making that choice, she proved that Zephyrian love and loyalty can exist without imperial compulsion. Queen Vashra's mandibles clicked together rapidly as she processed this perspective. You're suggesting that voluntary association might be stronger than compulsory service, she said. I'm suggesting that your daughter is more devoted to you than any imperial citizen has ever been, the young noble replied, because her devotion comes from love rather than duty. The throne room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Not hostile or confused, but contemplative. Marcus could see that something fundamental was shifting in the way the Zephyrians were thinking about their own civilization. Queen Vashra turned back to Marcus, and when she spoke, her voice carried a resolution that made the very air seem to vibrate. Human, she said formally, I am prepared to authorize a cessation of hostilities between the Empire and your species. I am prepared to arrange a meeting between myself and your daughter, my daughter, to explore the possibilities you have described. Marcus felt his heart race, with hope so intense it was almost painful. But the queen continued, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. I require something from you in return. Anything, your majesty. Queen Vashra's 6 eyes focused on him with an intensity that seemed to look directly into his soul. I require proof that humans are capable of the transformation you describe. Not just accepting Zephyrians as partners, but genuinely integrating with us in ways that preserve what is essential about both our peoples. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of proof, your majesty? Queen Vashra stood to her full height, her massive form towering over the assembled court. When she spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute authority and complete commitment. I am prepared to send a group of young Zephyrians to live among humans, to be raised and educated in your multicultural communities. In return, I want human families to send their children here, to live among us and learn our ways. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. She was proposing an exchange of hostages, but not in the traditional sense. She was talking about an exchange of children, an investment in a shared future that would make war between their species impossible. Your Majesty, he said slowly, that would be an extraordinary gesture of trust. It would be an extraordinary risk, Queen Vashra corrected, for both our peoples. But it would also be proof that this partnership you describe is possible. She turned to address her assembled nobles directly. If humans are truly capable of loving Zephyrian children as their own, if they can raise our young without trying to eliminate what makes them Zephyrian, then perhaps this human is correct about the possibilities for our future. Marcus felt tears forming in his eyes as he realized what was happening. This alien queen, ruler of the most powerful empire in the galaxy, was willing to risk everything on the possibility that love could be stronger than fear. And if Zephyrians can learn to value human traits like emotional intelligence and individual choice, if we can raise human children without breaking their spirits, the queen continued, then perhaps we can evolve into something greater than either of our peoples has achieved alone. She turned back to Marcus, and for the first time since he had entered the throne room, she smiled, an expression that was alien but unmistakably warm. Dr. Chun, she said, using his title for the first time, would you be willing to serve as humanity's first ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire? Would you help us discover whether this impossible thing might actually be possible? Marcus looked up at this incredible alien ruler, at the assembled nobles who were witnessing the potential end of 5,000 years of imperial tradition, at the holographic space where Zara's message had played. He thought of his own species' capacity for change, of the countless former enemies who were now humanity's closest friends, of the children who might grow up in a galaxy where Zephyrians and humans work together instead of fighting each other. Your Majesty, he said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber with absolute certainty, it would be the honor of my life. Queen Vashra's smile widened, revealing teeth that could have crushed steel, but that somehow